I thought I had the perfect life, a loving wife, two amazing kids, and a peaceful home. It wasn't luxurious, but it was ours, and it felt solid. My wife, Emma, was my best friend, or at least I believed she was. But life has a way of turning everything you hold dear upside down when you least expect it. It started one Saturday morning, the kind of morning that should have been ordinary. I was in the garage fixing my son's bike when my neighbor, Mr. Harris, walked up. He was the type who always had something to say but never really said much, you know. This time, though, his words hit me like a punch to the gut. "You've got a lot of trust in people, don't you?" he said, smirking. I frowned, wiping grease off my hands. "What are you talking about?" "Oh, nothing. Just saw Emma driving back last night. Didn't look like she was alone." He paused, eyeing me with a look I couldn't place. "Hope everything's all right at home." I laughed it off, but something about the way he said it stuck with me. Emma had told me she was visiting her sister, a perfectly normal thing she did once in a while. But now, by evening, I was unsettled. I didn't want to accuse her of anything, but a tiny voice in my head wouldn't shut up. So, I did something I'd never done before, I checked her phone. When I opened her messages, my heart stopped. At first, there were just mundane texts, work reminders, family group chats. But then I saw a name I hadn't expected, David. David was our close family friend. We'd had barbecues with him, celebrated holidays together. He wasn't just a friend, he was someone I trusted. But their conversation didn't read like something between friends. "David, last night was amazing. I can't stop thinking about it." "Emma, me too. I'll find a way to see you again soon." I stared at the screen, the words burning into my brain. I couldn't believe what I was reading. My hands were shaking so much I almost dropped the phone. That night, as Emma slept peacefully next to me, I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling. My mind raced with questions. How long had this been going on? Did our kids know? Did everyone else know except me? I wanted to confront her right then and there, but something stopped me. If this was real, if what I'd seen was the truth, I needed to be sure. I couldn't risk her twisting the narrative or making me doubt what I already knew. If you've ever been in a situation where your instincts told you something wasn't right, or you just can't believe how calm Emma was while lying, hit that subscribe button and stay tuned, because this story is only getting started. The next morning, I decided to test the waters. "Hey, how was your sister? You two catch up on everything?" I asked as I poured my coffee. Emma didn't flinch. She smiled and went on about how her sister was planning to redecorate her house and how they'd stayed up late talking. She was so calm, so convincing, that for a moment, I doubted myself. But then I remembered the messages. The betrayal wasn't just in what she had done, it was in how easily she lied to my face. I didn't say anything more. Instead, I spent the next few days watching, waiting, and gathering every bit of evidence I could find. I wasn't just going to confront her. I was going to make sure she couldn't deny a single thing. And that's when I saw them together. It was a Thursday evening, just after sunset. Emma had told me she'd be working late. I nodded, pretending to believe her, but I already had a plan. I had installed a GPS tracker on her car earlier that week. It wasn't something I ever thought I'd have to do, but desperate times call for desperate measures. Around 7 p.m., the tracker pinged her location, not her office, as she'd claimed, but a restaurant across town. A nice one. My stomach churned, and for a moment, I debated whether to follow her. But curiosity, or maybe something darker, got the better of me. I arrived at the restaurant and parked far enough away to stay unnoticed. I didn't even have to go inside. Through the large glass windows, I saw her, sitting at a dimly lit table, laughing, her hand casually brushing against his. "David." He leaned in close, and I saw the look in his eyes. It was the same look I'd once seen in the mirror when I was with her. That's when it hit me, this wasn't a fling. This wasn't a mistake. They were comfortable together, like this was their normal. I pulled out my phone, snapping a few photos. My hands shook, and it took every ounce of willpower not to march inside and confront them on the spot. But I stopped myself. If I did it then, I'd lose control, and I couldn't afford that. Instead, I drove home, my mind racing. The betrayal wasn't just about Emma, it was about David, too. A man I'd trusted like a brother. A man who'd been in our home, around our kids, laughing with me while secretly stabbing me in the back. When Emma got home that night, she acted as if nothing had happened. She kissed me on the cheek, said she was tired, and went straight to bed. I stood in the kitchen for a long time, gripping the counter so hard my knuckles turned white. How could she lie so easily? How long had she been doing this? The next day, I started digging deeper. If they were comfortable meeting in public, what else had they done? I checked bank statements, credit card charges, and even our shared calendar. It didn't take long to piece together the puzzle. Trips she'd claimed were girls' weekends were spent in hotels with him. Dates that didn't align with family events suddenly made sense. And the worst part? This had been going on for almost 2 years. 2 years of lies. 2 years of betrayal. 2 years of me unknowingly playing the fool. But I wasn't going to play the fool anymore. I made a decision that day: if Emma and David thought they could take everything from me, my trust, my dignity, my family, they were wrong. I was going to show them what it felt like to lose everything. The first step. Talking to a lawyer, meeting the lawyer was the first time I felt like I had some control over the situation. His name was Greg, a no-nonsense kind of guy who'd seen it all. When I laid out the evidence, screenshots of texts, photos of their meetings, and even financial records, his expression didn't change. "You've got a solid case," he said, flipping through the documents. "But if you want this to stick, you'll need more. The courts aren't just going to care about the affair. They'll care about the impact, on you, your kids, and the financial situation. Can you prove how this affects you as a family?" I nodded. I'd already started taking notes. Every time Emma lied, every time she claimed to be working late, every unexplained expense, I wrote it all down. I wasn't just going to expose her, I was going to make sure she couldn't walk away unscathed. "Also," Greg added, leaning forward, "if you want to go after him, the family friend, you could file for alienation of affection." That phrase stuck with me. Alienation of affection. It sounded clinical, but it carried weight. David hadn't just betrayed me, he'd actively taken part in destroying my family. If there was a way to hold him accountable, I wasn't going to hesitate. That evening, I started putting the plan into motion. Step 1 was protecting my finances. I moved money from our joint accounts into one solely in my name. I paid off debts tied to both of US and canceled the credit cards Emma used. By the time she noticed, I'd already secured everything important. "Hey, why isn't the card working?" she asked casually one afternoon, holding her phone. I shrugged. "Oh, must be an issue with the bank. I'll look into it." She believed me. Of course, she did. She was so wrapped up in her double life that she didn't even question me. Step 2 was gathering more evidence. I couldn't rely on just the texts and photos I already had. So, I started tracking her movements. I kept the GPS tracker active on her car and even planted a recording device in her bag. It wasn't something I was proud of, but I needed the truth. What I heard over the next few weeks made my blood boil. Conversations between Emma and David, full of inside jokes, plans for future trips, and even insults about me. "Does he even notice?" David asked in one recording, laughing. "No," Emma replied, her tone casual. "He's clueless. Sometimes I think he's too busy being a dad to even care what I'm doing." I clenched my fists so hard the recording device almost cracked. I cared. I cared more than she'd ever know. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place one Saturday when Emma told me she had to run errands. I followed her, parking a few cars away as she met David at a park. They sat on a bench, close enough to touch, talking quietly. I took photos and video, capturing every second. When I showed the evidence to Greg, he gave me a satisfied nod. This will hold up. Now, the question is, how far are you willing to take this? Far enough, I said without hesitation. Emma and David thought they had control of the situation, but they didn't realize the storm that was coming for them. I had spent weeks preparing for this moment. I didn't want to act out of anger or say something I couldn't take back. I wanted clarity, control, and above all, the upper hand. It was a quiet evening, and the kids were already asleep. Emma was in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone. I walked in, placed my phone on the table, and sat across from her. "We need to talk," I said, my voice calm but firm. She looked up, confused. "What's wrong?" I slid my phone across the table and played the video of her and David at the park. Her face paled as the sound of their laughter filled the room. "Still think I'm clueless?" I asked, my tone sharp but measured. Her lips parted, but no words came out. I let the silence stretch, forcing her to sit with her guilt. Finally, she stammered, I can explain." "Explain?" I interrupted, leaning forward. "Explain how you've been lying to me for 2 years. How you've been sneaking around with David. How you've been living 2 lives while pretending to care about this family." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I wasn't moved. I had given her my trust, my loyalty, and this was how she repaid me. "It wasn't supposed to happen," she whispered, her voice breaking. It got out of hand." I laughed bitterly. "Got out of hand? Emma, this wasn't a one-time mistake. You lied to me every day for 2 years. That's not out of hand, that's a choice. Over and over again, you chose him." She broke down, covering her face with her hands. For a moment, I almost felt pity, but I reminded myself of everything I'd heard, seen, and felt over the past weeks. "Does David know I'm onto you?" I asked, my voice colder now. Her head shot up, panic in her eyes. "No, please, Michael. Don't do anything to him. This is between us." "Between us?" I repeated, shaking my head. "No, Emma. This isn't just about you and me. David was my friend. He was in our home, around our kids, acting like nothing was going on. He doesn't get to walk away from this unscathed." She begged me not to ruin David's life, but her pleas only fueled my resolve. She hadn't cared about ruining mine. Why should I care about protecting hers, or his? "I've already filed for divorce," I said, standing up. "You'll be hearing from my lawyer. Oh, and just so you know, I've filed an alienation of affection lawsuit against David. He's going to pay for this too." Emma froze, her face a mixture of shock and horror. "Michael, please. Think about the kids. Don't drag this out." I cut her off. "The kids? You mean the ones you've been lying to while sneaking off with David? Don't pretend this was about them. You did this for yourself." She had no response. She just sat there, broken and speechless, as I walked away. That night, I slept in the guest room, not out of anger, but because I couldn't bear to be near her. I knew this was just the beginning of a long battle, but for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was in control. The days following the confrontation were a blur of tense silence and legal proceedings. Emma tried to keep up the appearance of normalcy, especially around the kids, but I could see the cracks in her facade. She was unraveling, and it was only a matter of time before everything fell apart. I made sure to keep things civil for the sake of our children. They didn't deserve to be caught in the storm their mother had created. But every interaction with Emma felt strained. She barely spoke, and when she did, it was only about logistics, schedules for the kids or minor household issues. Then came the official divorce papers. I made sure Greg handled everything thoroughly. The evidence I'd gathered left no room for negotiation. Emma had no leverage. When she saw the terms, she broke down in the kitchen. "You're really going to take everything, aren't you?" she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I'm taking what's fair," I said, my tone steady. "You don't get to lie, cheat, and then expect to walk away with a free pass." She didn't argue. She knew she didn't have the strength, or the right. As for David, he wasn't doing any better. The alienation of affection lawsuit hit him hard. His wife found out about the affair during the legal proceedings and left him almost immediately. Word spread through the community quickly. He lost his job, his reputation, and any semblance of a normal life. One afternoon, I got a call from him. I wasn't sure why I answered, but part of me wanted to hear what he had to say. "Michael," his voice was shaky, desperate. "Please, can we talk? This lawsuit, it's ruining me. I made a mistake, okay? I'm sorry. I didn't bother hiding my disdain." "A mistake? You destroyed a family, David. You pretended to be my friend while sneaking around with my wife. You don't get to call that a mistake." "I didn't mean for it to go this far," he said, his voice cracking. "I've lost everything." "Good," I replied coldly. "Now you know how it feels." I hung up, feeling no guilt, no remorse. He had chosen this path, just like Emma had. Meanwhile, I focused on rebuilding my life. I threw myself into my work, taking on new projects and securing a promotion. I made sure the kids felt loved and supported, keeping their routines steady in their lives as unaffected as possible. Emma, on the other hand, was crumbling. She moved into a small apartment across town and struggled to adjust to life on her own. Her once confident, composed demeanor was replaced by a hollow sadness. Friends she'd once leaned on were nowhere to be found, most of them had taken my side when the truth came out. One evening, after dropping off the kids at my house, she lingered in the doorway. "Michael," she said quietly, her voice trembling. "I know I've hurt you more than I can ever fix, but I'm sorry. For everything." I stared at her, searching for any sign of sincerity. Her face was pale, her eyes red from crying. She looked like a shell of the woman I once knew. "I don't need your apology, Emma," I said firmly. "I just need you to be a good mother to our kids. That's all that matters now." She nodded, biting her lip to hold back tears. "I'm trying," she whispered before turning and walking away. I watched her go, feeling nothing but emptiness. The life we'd built together was gone, and all that was left was the rubble. But I knew one thing for certain, I was never going to let myself be in that position again. As weeks turned into months, the chaos began to settle. The divorce was finalized, and Emma moved permanently into her new apartment. Our kids adjusted better than I'd expected, though I knew they felt the shift. I kept their lives as stable as possible, helping with homework, attending school events, and making sure they felt loved every single day. But the house felt different. It was quieter, emptier. At first, the silence was suffocating. Every room was a reminder of what had been lost. But over time, I realized it wasn't the silence that bothered me, it was the weight of the memories. I made changes, starting with small ones, a fresh coat of paint in the living room, new furniture in the bedroom. It wasn't about erasing the past but creating a space that felt like mine. A space where I could move forward. The turning point came one afternoon when my daughter, Grace, came home from school with a drawing she'd made in art class. It was a picture of our family, just the three of us, her brother, and me. She handed it to me proudly, her smile wide. "This is us now, Daddy," she said. I felt a lump in my throat as I looked at the picture. It was simple, childlike, but there was something powerful about it. She wasn't dwelling on what we'd lost. She was showing me what we still had. "That's beautiful, sweetheart," I said, pulling her into a hug. From that moment on, I stopped looking back. My focus was on my kids, on building a life where they felt secure and loved. I started saying yes to things I'd always put off, taking them to the zoo, going on weekend road trips, even signing up for a cooking class with my son. It wasn't just about keeping busy, it was about creating new memories, new traditions. And for the first time in years, I felt free. Emma tried to stay involved with the kids, but her struggles made it difficult. She'd show up late for pickups, miss school events, and sometimes go days without calling. I could see the guilt weighing on her, but I couldn't fix it for her. That was her burden to bear. One evening, Grace asked me a question that caught me off guard. "Do you still love Mommy?" I paused, unsure of how to respond. Finally, I said, "I'll always care about your mom because she's your mom. But sometimes, people change, and they're not meant to stay together." She seemed to think about that for a moment before nodding. "I'm glad you're here," she said softly. Her words stayed with me long after she'd gone to bed. It wasn't just her gratitude that moved me, it was the realization that I was doing something right. I was building a life for us, one step at a time. Years passed, and life found a steady rhythm. My kids grew older, blossoming into strong, independent young adults. Grace graduated from college with honors, and her brother, Ryan, followed close behind. Watching them thrive was the ultimate reward for all the struggles I'd endured. One day, Grace came to me with a piece of news that filled me with equal parts joy and bittersweet reflection: she was getting married. The months leading up to the wedding were a whirlwind of planning. I threw myself into helping her, offering to pay for everything I could and ensuring her big day would be unforgettable. She was radiant, happier than I'd ever seen her, and as the day approached, I couldn't help but feel proud of the life we'd built together. The wedding itself was beautiful. Grace's fiancé was a kind, grounded young man who treated her with the respect and love she deserved. As I walked her down the aisle, I couldn't help but glance at the rows of guests. Among them was Emma, sitting quietly near the back. It had been years since I'd spoken to her beyond the occasional text about the kids. She looked older, tired, and far removed from the confident, vibrant woman I'd once known. At the reception, she approached me. It was the first time we'd been face to face in what felt like forever. "Michael," she began, her voice soft, almost hesitant. "Can we talk?" I nodded, though part of me wasn't sure why. We stepped outside, away from the noise of the celebration. The evening air was cool, the sky dotted with stars. Emma turned to me, her hands trembling slightly. "I wanted to thank you," she said, her voice breaking. "For what?" I asked, genuinely surprised. "For raising them," she said, gesturing toward the reception hall. "For giving them the love and stability I couldn't. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to know how sorry I am." Her words hung in the air, heavy with emotion. For years, I'd thought about what I'd say to her if this moment ever came. I'd imagined anger, accusations, maybe even gloating. But standing there, looking at her, all I felt was, nothing. "I forgave you a long time ago, Emma," I said finally. "Not for you, but for me. I couldn't move on if I didn't let it go." Tears streamed down her face, and for the first time, I saw something I hadn't expected: relief. "You were right to leave me," she said, her voice shaking. "I destroyed everything good in my life. I don't blame you for anything, Michael. You gave me more chances than I deserved. I didn't respond right away. I thought about everything we'd been through, the betrayal, the pain, the years of picking up the pieces. And yet, here we were, on the other side of it all. You've still got time," I said finally. "To figure out who you are, to make peace with yourself. But the past is done, It doesn't belong to either of us anymore. She nodded, wiping her eyes. Thank you, she whispered. For everything. I watched her walk away, disappearing back into the reception. I stayed outside for a moment, letting the cool air fill my lungs. When I went back inside, Grace spotted me and waved me over. Dance with me, Dad, she said, her eyes bright. As we twirled on the dance floor, her laughter echoing around us, I realized something: I wasn't defined by the pain anymore. I wasn't a victim of betrayal or a man seeking revenge. I was a father, a protector, and someone who had learned to rebuild. The past didn't own me. My life was mine again. And for the first time in years, I felt whole.